Today's daf is Gittin Daf Lamed Zayin Gittin 37. We're going to start on 36b. One line from the bottom. The Gemara says, "My prusbol." What is a prusbol? We've been discussing prusbol, which is this document that this technique that a person can give to the court a contract and say, basically, all my loans that I've given to other people are now given over to you, and thereby the court cancels the court upholds the loans, which otherwise would have been canceled by the sabbatical year. So today's Daf Yomi, the Gemara says, "What's a prusbol?" Says Rav Chisda, "Pros boli poti." It's a takana. It's a repair for the rich and for the poor. It's the pros boli uvoti. It's the takana for the rich and for the poor. It's a takana for the rich because we're going to say that their loans are not able to be canceled, and it's takana for the poor because otherwise the rich people wouldn't lend them the money. Boli uboti, Rashi says, ashirim v'aniyim. And the Gemara explains that's what this means. Boli elu ashirim. The boli means the wealthy people, because it says v'shavarti es gaon uslem, in the tochacham, the curses. Hashem says, I will break the gaon uslem. And what Vitani Rav Yosef taught, elu bulal shabihuda. This refers to the wealthy ones of Judah. So we see from here that bulos is a term for wealthy. And buti, these are the poor people. Elu aniyim d'chsev havet tavitenu. You have to lend him money, everything that he's missing in life, you have to give to him. So it says Rava so we see Buti refers to Havei Tavitenu. Normally Rava said to a person who spoke the vernacular, Loaz, he spoke the vernacular, so meaning a Persian around him, he said, "My prusbol." What are these prusbols? So I'm like Pursa de Milsa. It means a takana of the matter. It means to fix something. So word prusbol means to be a takana. So the Gemara says, Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Yosomin ein tzrichen prusbol. But the orphans don't require a prusbol. Why? Meaning to say, the way Rashi understands this, that if their father had outstanding notes to collect from people, and their father died and left it to the orphans don't need to take that to the court to do a prusbol because, and as the Gemara is about to explain, the Rebbe Gamliel based Dino Avi and Shal Yisomim, because it's as though the documents already in the court, and meaning to say, since Rebbe Gamliel and his court are the fathers of the orphans, and so it's as though that the court is responsible to protect the orphans. Rashi says. So that's what the Gemara is saying. The Rebbe Gamliel Beis Dino are the fathers of the orphans, and so therefore they don't need to take their documents to the court. Tanan Hasam, we learned in the Mishnah in Shavias, Ein Kozim Prusbol El Karka, that you don't write Prusbol, that the only way you can write a prusbol is if there is real estate. Ein Kozim Prusbol El Karka, if there is no, meaning to say you can only write a prusbol document if the person who you lent the money to has real estate associated with that loan. And the reason is, Rashi explains, is because the prusbol is a takana, and a takana is only made for things that are common. And most people, it's not common to lend money without real estate. So therefore, the only way it fits into that category of common things is if the prusbol is written on real estate. If he doesn't have prusbol, then if he doesn't have prusbol, then you give him a little bit of his property, and then you give him a little drop of property, a kolshu, and then as a result of that, he has real estate. Become kolshu. What's a kolshu? It says Rashi Korach in the name of Rav, even just a stalk of a cabbage, that's enough. And then he's a landowner. Amar Rav Yehuda, I feel makom even if you just gave him a little bit of space for the oven and the stove. Codes for no prusbol. That'll be enough to write a prusbol. The Gemara says, is that really the case? Einiva tani hill and codes in prusbol. So, but didn't is it really the case that you can lend him the space for the stove or the oven and write the prusbol, assuming that that's enough to say he's a landowner? But then he'll say that you can only write to prusbul if it was a perforated pot, meaning that it's connected to the ground because there's a hole in it. But doesn't that mean nakav in shein nakav low? And only if there's a hole in the pot, it's connected to the ground. But if there's not a hole, why not? But why don't we say that the pot itself is space, and that the pot itself is like this, the oven and the stove, and so therefore it's like it's connected to the ground in that manner. Gemara says no. Well, we're talking about a case where the pot is not even placed on the ground directly, so you don't even have that space because the pot is on pegs. And so therefore the pegs, which are really small, and maybe the pegs are, in this case, maybe still owned by the owner and not the owner of the flower pot, but the owner of the land. So they're not on the land at all. And so that's why you can only write a prusbul on a pot with that, which has a hole in it, which is attached to the ground. Ravashi maknila gidma de dikla. Ravashi would give the person who was borrowing money, you would give him the stump of a tree. And that would be enough to say you're a landowner. Because away prusbul, and he would write a prusbul on it. Rabbanan de Ravashi. Master Milayu Hadadi. The Rabbanan from the house of Ravashi, they would just give over words to each other, meaning to say they wouldn't even write a formal document. They would just say to their friends, "You're my court, and my debt that I is given to you to collect whatever I want." Meaning to say that they would do the whole prusbul orally. So Rabbi Yochanan Maser Mili Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Rabbi Yochanan just said this orally to Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Amarle Tzrichna Midei Achrini. He said, "Do I need anything else?" He said, "Well, Amarle Tzrichas. That's all. That's sufficient." Tanara Banan. So now the Gemara says the following case: Engel Karko or Arav Yeshlo Takar. So the person himself has no real estate. The person who he lends the money to doesn't have real estate, but the person who guaranteed the loan for that person does have real estate. Kosin of Prisbal. That's enough to write a prusbul because the guarantor has real estate, so it's okay. Let's say person you write it to and the guarantor, neither of them have real estate. But there's another person who owes the borrower money, and he has real estate. So that's also sufficient to write a prusbul on. Prusbul is Rabbi Nassan. This is what's known throughout Shas as the shibuda of Rabbi Nassan, the lien of Rabbi Nassan, meaning to say. And what does Rabbi Nassan say? How do you know if Reuven says to Shimon, "You owe me money," and Shimon says to Levi, "You owe me money," that Reuven can go straight to Levi to collect the money straight from him? He gives the money to the one who was guilty to him, meaning to say that that's a valid method of collecting. Tanan also, we learned in the Mishnah in Shavias. Hashvias mishametes as a malva bein b'shtar bein shelo b'shtar. That the sabbatical year cancels the loan, whether it cancels different types of loans, whether it was done with a contract or whether it was a loan without a contract. The sabbatical year cancels it. That's what the Mishnah says. So Rabbi Shmuel come to explain the Mishnah. Rabbi Shmuel Damri Travayo b'shtar, when it says that it cancels the loan with a contract, means shtar sheyesh b'achrayus. That means if the contract has real estate associated with it, if there's a lien on the real estate, nechasim b'shtar sheyesh b'achrayus nechasim. Shelo b'shtar, it also cancels loans that are not with shtar she'ein b'achrayus nechasim. The loans that have no real estate. And kol shekei malva peh, for sure cancels oral loans. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, they explain what it means. B'shtar shtar she'ein b'achrayus nechasim. Sabbatical year only cancels loans that have no guarantee, no lien on it. Shelo b'shtar malva peh. And when it says it cancels loans without a contract, that means even oral loans. Aval shtar sheyesh b'achrayus nechasim. But according to Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, if the contract has a lien on the property, then ain't a mashame. Then the sabbatical year does not cancel those loans. And the reason is, Rashi says, because it's already collected. It's as though you own the real estate already. The lender already owns that real estate. So it's like the loan is already collected. Now you can also do Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. We have a price supporting this because it says shtar chov meshamed. It says a note, an IOU will cancel. If you have a note, the sabbatical year cancels it. But if that note has a lien on the property, then the sabbatical year is not canceled, the loan, because it says it's already collected. Another brisa, Tanya Idoch states, another brisa, Siyamo Sada Achas Pavaso. Let's say when you lend him the money, you designate one field to collect, Eino Mishamet. Then we're going to say that the loan is not canceled. Oh, not only that, so the loan is not canceled then because it's as though you own that field already. Not only that, but even if he writes, all my possessions there's a lien on them, they're guaranteed. That's also examples of the sabbatical year does not cancel those loans. Is all consistent with the position of Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Says the Gemara, so Rav Asi's relatives had a contract which had written in it a loan with a guarantee of property. Also coming to Rav Asi, he asked Rav Asi, is the sabbatical year cancel this? He says no, sabbatical year does not cancel these loans because it's a guarantee. But maybe he didn't trust Rav Asi because Rav Asi was his relative, so he was no gay of a davar. He had negios. He was connected. He was maybe should have recused himself. So Shav gave Askel coming to Rabbi Yochanan. He went to Rabbi Yochanan and asked him the same question. Rabbi Yochanan says the sabbatical year cancels those loans. He says to Rabbi Yochanan, Meshame, as Rav Asi coming to Rabbi Yochanan. So Rav Asi goes back to Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan says Meshame, that the sabbatical year cancels it. Mar says, but you yourself said sabbatical year does not cancel loans that have a guarantee associated with them. That's how you interpreted the Mishnah. So Amalei, so Rabbi Yochanan said, just because we have a thought, we're going to act on it. This is the same expression that Rabbi Yochanan used earlier. The Gemara cites it back on 19a, where Rabbi Yochanan said this about whether or not witnesses could just, if they don't know how to sign, if they could just fill in a document that would have been etched in, if that would be considered a signature. It's the same expression. Second time it appears in the tractate. Don't we have a brisa that supports your approach that you had cited earlier, that if there's a guarantee, the sabbatical year does not cancel the loan? The Gemara says, so Rabbi Yochanan said maybe that price is just like Beis Shammai, who says the Amri Shtar Omer Gavos Kagavadam. He says that if your contract ready to collect, it's like it's collected. But we don't pass them like that, Beis Shammai. So maybe it's not really collected, and so therefore the sabbatical year cancels those loans. Tanan also we learned in the Mishnah in Shvius Amal Bas Chaver Malos Al Mashkon. So this is the Mishnah in Shvius. It says if you lend your friend money and you give him a collateral for that loan, or if you give your contracts over to the court, the sabbatical year does not cancel those loans. Now, Bishlama, this makes sense. Bishlama, this makes sense. It makes sense if it's a case of Moser Shtarasov Bezin, where you give your contracts to the court. I understand there why it's not Mishamtin. I understand why it's not Mishamtin, because the court has seized those contracts. And I'm in my time, but if you ended on a collateral, what's the reason why the sabbatical year does not cancel those loans? Because he holds the collateral, it's like he's collected the loan already, and so therefore it's not lo yigos. It's the same thing as a guarantee. Well, what about if he lives in his courtyard? He lends him money and then he lives in his courtyard. He's kind of seized possession of the courtyard. Would you say there also the loan does not get canceled? He says the case of the collateral is different. The collateral is different to Conway because he's acquired the collateral. The lender has acquired the collateral, and therefore if the lender loses the collateral, then he's responsible for it. And that's from Rabbi Yitzchak. The Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Minayla Balchov, this is what Rabbi Yitzchak taught, and we have this in Pesachim, Bamitzia, and Shavuos, and Kedushin. He says, Minayla Balchov Shakona Mashkon. How do we know that a Balchov, a creditor, acquires the Mashkon, acquires the collateral? It says, now you're supposed to give the collateral back for the person to use during the day. If it's a pasuk from the Torah, if he needs the clothing or utensils and give it back and it's charity. Now, if the lender hasn't actually acquired it, why is it considered charity? So we see from here the principle is that the creditor has acquired the mashkon. Mara says, Tanan also, we learned in the Mishnah again in Shavuos that the Mishnah tells us. Tanan also, we learned in the Mishnah in Shavuos on the top of 37b. Somebody returns a debt to his friend in the sabbatical year, and he's supposed to say, you don't owe me the money. The sabbatical year canceled it. But if the guy says, nevertheless, I want to pay you, he's allowed to accept the money. And he's supposed to say that. He's supposed to say, nevertheless, I want to pay you. That's how the Mishnah in Shvius tells us. That person who returns the loan, even though it's canceled by sabbatical year, Chachamim approve of such a thing. But the person who's collecting the money has the first say, Meshamed Ani. In the Dvar Shemitah reads, Rashi says, Dibor Shel Shemitah. It means to say this is the speech of the Shemitah, meaning to say that the lender is supposed to say Meshamed Ani. He's supposed to say the sabbatical year canceled the loan. So Amar Rava, V'talilei Ada Amar Hachi. Rava says, V'talilei. So Rashi says this means you can hang him until he agrees to return the money. Others say it means, Talilei means you keep him there. You pressure him into saying it through peer pressure. So can you really do that? When you give him the money, don't say to him, I'm giving it to you as my debt. The borrower is supposed to say it was my money, I'm giving it to you as a gift. So how can you say you force it back? So no, you pressure him until he says it using the right language, that I'm giving it back to you as a gift. Abba Bar Marta, Abba Bar Minyomi, a story of Mosik Bey Rabba Zuze. So he had to pay back Rabba some money. So Rabba was asking him money. Rabba was trying to get back his money. So I seen in the B'Shvius. So he came back to him at the end of the sabbatical year to pay him the money. So what happened then? He says, sorry, you don't have to pay me. It's the sabbatical year, you're done. So Shakunu va'azal. So this Abba Bar Menyumi or Abba Bar Marta, whatever his name was, we were insured. There has two possibilities. He takes his money and he goes. Azal Abaye Ashcha Dave Atziv. He found Rabba was sad. I'm like, am I Atziv? He says, am I Atziv Mar? Why are you so sad? I'm like, this is what happened. I told him he doesn't have to pay me, and he believed me, and he left. Azul Gabe Sabaya goes to Abba Bar Marta and he says, tell me what happened. So Amtule Zuze Lamar. He said, did you pay back Rabba? In. I went back to give him the money. He said, what did he say to you? Mishamin. He said, you don't owe me the money. The Amrit Le, Alpha became, did you tell him nevertheless I still want to pay you? Well, he said, no. I didn't say that. But he said, if you would have said that to you, he would have taken the money from you. Now go back and tell him this and say to him, yeah, even though the sabbatical year canceled the loan, still nevertheless I want to give you the money. He went back and he said this to him and he said, nevertheless, here's the money. He took the money from him. Rabbi said, oh, this rabbi didn't understand this from the beginning. This Torah scholar didn't understand the right way to do it from the beginning, which is that even though I'm saying you don't owe me the money, you're supposed to still say, I'm going to give you the money. So the borrower should pay back the money. This is a mitzvah from the Torah to release the loan, but the borrower should still pay back the money. A person is believed to say, the prusbul is a very, very light contract. You see this from here because a person is believed to say, I had a prusbul and I lost it. We believe him. My time. Because once the rabbis instituted the prusbul, we don't assume that the person who had a very easy solution to collect the money would have abandoned collecting in the permitted way and eaten in the prohibitive manner. Meaning to say, so for sure he would have done the permitted manner. So he had the principle. He wouldn't lie and make it up. He would have done it. Rav would go a step further when the litigants would come in front of him. Rav would say to them, did you have a prusbul? Meaning he would lead the witness and coach him on what to say. Maybe you had a prusbul and you lost it. He would even open up the mouth of the mute. So now we learned, but we have a contradiction because it says, in one source, it says a creditor that finds a note and it doesn't have a prusbul with it, then they don't collect the money, meaning to say that if there's no prusbul, he can't collect the money. And so we see from here that you don't assume that he had a prusbul and he lost it. So the Gemara says tonight, so it's a dispute whether or not you can believe him that he had a prusbul and he lost it. It's a machokas tanaim. So now we're up to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah is going to basically move to a new topic. We're no longer discussing sabbatically here. We're discussing now the concept of slaves, and even though we no longer have Canaanite slaves anymore, thank God, Baruch Hashem, we no longer have that. The Gemara uses that to take off and have a discussion of other areas of law, which the slave was used as a starting point to get into different aspects of law. So it's obviously very distasteful to discuss slaves, but it's very clear from our Gemara that the concept is how to free slaves, just like the concept of a get is how to move on from a rupture, how to move on from a divorce, how to repair the world. So to the slave, really the concept is how to treat a slave with dignity, how to release the slave into society, how to free the slave. So the Mishnah tells us, Eved Nishba, let's say there was a Canaanite slave, and then he was captured, and then other Jews came along and they wanted to redeem this Canaanite slave. A Canaanite slave is considered to be a quasi-Jew. He's responsible to do many of the mitzvot, just not the time-bound positive commandment mitzvot. So a slave was captured, and then the other Jews came and released him. Now, what was their intent when they released him? If they released him, Lashum Evet, if they released him to be a slave, Yishtabed, it goes back to being a slave. In Lashum Ben Chorin, if he was released to be freed, well, Yishtabed, then he doesn't go back to be enslaved. Rashbag says, Ben Kach Ben Kach Yishtabed. Rashbag says, either way, he goes back to being a slave. And the Gemara is going to discuss this now. And what are we referring to? If we're referring to the concept before that the owner of the slave never gave up hope on the slave, meaning to say he still owned the slave. Well, if that's the case, so Shum Ben Chorin, even if the Jews who came along and redeemed him to be free, why should he not be enslaved? He was still owned by the first Jew. But if it was after the original owner gave up hope, if he redeemed him to be a slave, why is he able to do that? Once he's freed forever. So, and if he gave up hope, he's freed. So Amar Abaye says it's going to be machokas between Abaye and Rava. This is what Abaye says. Abaye says what we're referring to is the original owner has never given up hope. So if that's the case, why can he become freed? So Abaye explains, so if he redeemed him to be a slave, he goes back to the original owner. If he redeemed him to be a slave, well, Yishtabed, he doesn't go free. He's not enslaved, not to the first owner and not to the second owner. Where Rabbi Sheni, for sure he's not enslaved to the second owner, because he redeemed him to be free. But why is he not enslaved to the first owner? Because we're concerned that if he's going to go back to the first owner, that people will not release the slave, redeem the slave, and we want him to be redeemed. People will say, we're concerned people are going to refuse to redeem him. And they'll say, if we redeem him, he's just going to go back to the first owner. Why do we have to redeem him? And we want the slave to be redeemed so he can do the mitzvahs. Whereas Rashbag says, according to Abaye, Rashbag says, either way he's going to be enslaved. Because even though he's going to go back to being a slave, people will still redeem him. It's a mitzvah to redeem him, even if he's not going to be a full Jew. He's going to be a quasi, a Canaanite slave Jew. It's still people are going to redeem him, and so therefore, Rashbag says we don't have to be concerned. People will refrain from redeeming him. Rava comes along and says it the opposite way. Rava says, no, what we're talking about a case, our mission is referring to cases la'achar yeir. So the original owner is given up hope. And so therefore, Lashum Eved, if he releases him to be a slave, Yishtavel Rabba Sheni, he's going to become a slave to the second owner. Now, if he releases him Lashum Ben Chorin, then if he redeems him to be freed, then he's not going to be enslaved not to the first owner or not to the second owner. Rabba Sheni lo, it's obviously not to the second owner, because he redeemed him to be free. So of course he's not going to be free to the second owner. And he doesn't go back to the first owner because the first owner had already given up hope. Whereas Rashbag says, why does Rashbag says he's going to go back to the first owner and be enslaved that the first owner had already given up hope? Why? So guys, Rashbag says, listen, we need to do this because we need to make sure that he goes back and be enslaved. Otherwise, every slave is going to go ahead and throw himself into the hands of the idolater, so that the Jews will come along and redeem him and will automatically become freed. So therefore, we're going to release him only back on the condition that he's enslaved. So the Gemara challenges, Gemara is going to challenge Rava. Rava says that what are we talking about? So after the Mishnah is referring to after the original owner gave up hope. So the Gemara challenges Rava from a Brisa. Meisvei says the Brisa as follows. The Rashbag says this principle. We have the Brisa that says that just like we don't have to be concerned that they won't release him, because just like it's a mitzvah to release the free person, so too it's a mitzvah to free the slaves. It makes sense, the statement of Rashbag, who says that the whole statement happened before he gave up hope. That's why he says the word just like, meaning to say that he's not going to be afraid that he's not going to be concerned that we're not going to release him and then not redeem him, because it's a mitzvah to redeem him. That's why it says shame, just like they would redeem him if he was a full Jew. So too they're redeeming him as a slave. El Rava, but according to Rava, the Amar Achar Yeush, who says that it happens, that it refers to after he was freed. Hi kashem. Why does Rashbag says it's kashem? Why does Mishum Lechizkio? The reasoning for Rashbag is not because of kashem. The reasoning of Rashbag is because of the principle of Chizkio, that we don't want everybody to throw themselves into the army. So the Gemara says, look at Rashi. According to Rav, who says that the Mishnah is talking about after he gave a pope, and the reason of Tanakama is because of Afkasa di Yeyushu, because he gave up Yeyush. So therefore, Mike is ashamed to come here. At time of the Rashbag, the reason Rashbag is because of Chizkiah. We don't want him to fall into the army. So the Gemara says, Rav would say, Rashbag didn't understand what the Rabbanim were saying. This is what he said to them. So if this case of Ramesh is referring before Yeyush, before he gave a pope, that's why it says Kishem. You have to redeem him just even though he's a slave. And if he had already given a pope, like Chizkiah says, he goes back to the original owner, and because we're worried otherwise they're going to throw themselves into the idolaters in order to go free. So the Gemara says, according to Rabba, it says it was L'achar Yeyush or Rabba Sheni, and he goes back to the second owner. So the Gemara says, Rabba Sheni, from who did the second owner acquire him that he's going to be a slave? The Gemara says, Mishavai. He acquired him from the idolater. So the Gemara says, Shavai Gufe Mikanilai. Who did the idolater acquire him from? The Gemara says, In Kanilai Lamaisi Yadav. Meaning, say, how could the idolater acquire him? Yeah, he acquired him Lamaisi Yadav. He acquired him for the work product of his hands. So, and Shlakish is going to tell us that that's something that the idolater is capable of doing. and we'll just look at this. Rashi is very significant. Rashi, the Yisrael Kanilei Miyado, the Yisrael acquired this idolater, this slave from the idolater Yadav. He acquired him for his work, Bekasba, with money. Well, Gufe, and he acquired his body, Betfila L'Shem Abdus, by immersing him to be a slave. Like we said in Yevamot Bachotz. Vafil Malva Tavel Gabe Rishon, and even though he had immersed and was circumcised by the first master, he didn't acquire the idolater acquired not the body, but acquired the work of his hands. Because a Jew could sell the work product of his hands to the idolater. So the Jew would go free during the Jubilee year, but the idolater would remain a slave forever. Okay, so this is the introduction of this topic of the slaves and a very, very powerful Gemara. Okay, we'll stop over here.